Ahishi Usul, Ara Humphreys, Ara Kine, Iana Specialta, a Colakaha, nos Gwinushalik, Curran Fear Falcher of Galer, Gujin Ulskal, and Noct. Is Misha Jim Brown, August Town, the Honor Dumsa Behem Ukto and Ulskal Naher and Galiev. August and is more Honor Dumsa Falchus Feha Coro of Galer, Gujin Okaj, Fear Hawak Duck Shaw. Welcome to this evening's presentations. I'm very pleased to welcome a number of important delegates here this evening, and Taoiseach Enda Kenny, who will address you shortly. A very distinguished panel of speakers, Professor Mary Daly, who is the session chair, Professor Roy Foster, the plenary speaker, and a series of panellists, Professor Anne Dolan, Professor Anthony McGilligan, Professor Ian Nifriel, Professor Emmett O'Connor, Professor Graham Walker. Like you, I am keen to hear their insights and their perspectives on 1916 in this centenary year of commemorations. By way of introduction, just a few short words about the event itself. For the next 3 days, NUI Galway is proud to be the venue for a landmark moment in this history and this year of national celebration and reflection, as we host an academic conference entitled Ireland 1916-2016, The Promise and Challenge of National Sovereignty. As a centrepiece of the centenary conversations, this is intended to round off a special year and to begin a conversation about Ireland's identity and choices for the next 100 years. Earlier this afternoon, and indeed for the next 3 days, you'll hear from leading Irish scholars drawn from major international universities and from third-level institutions on the island of Ireland. They will reflect with us on a century of national sovereignty and examine how the Irish state has delivered on the promise of Easter 1916. And we'll be prompted to question what the future holds for Ireland as a small independent nation on the periphery of Europe in an increasingly globalised world. NUI Galway is particularly pleased to host this important national conversation. And I am also pleased that all the Irish universities, all the universities on the island of Ireland, are represented in the conference programme, along with the Institute of Technology, other colleges, independent scholars, and cultural institutions. And now, according, it's my pleasure to introduce an Taoiseach this evening. Enda Kenny needs very little introduction. He's been leader of Fine Gael since 2002 and Taoiseach since March 2011. He has led our nation during what has arguably been one of the most challenging times in our modern history, times when our financial sovereignty were certainly called into question and seriously challenged. Far O'Nearher, a man from the West, he has a strong association with this university, having undertaken study here in the mid-1970s, before the untimely death of his father threw him into political life. Elected in the ensuing by-election on November 12th, 1975, 41 years ago this weekend, he became the youngest member of the 20th Dáil at the age of 24 years of age. Today, in a career spanning 5 decades, he's now the father of the Dáil. He's also the first Galway alumnus and friend of this university to hold the office of Taoiseach. Taoiseach, I warmly welcome you back to your alma mater and thank you for being with us this evening. Accordia, please welcome an Taoiseach Enda Kenny TD.
Gurmagif, Uachtarán, Ara Rialtais Humphreys, Ara Stáit Kine, Tachta Nachtan, Chancellor Ulskal Náisiúnta na hÉireann Maurice Manning, Táoiseach Beliver Ócáid Starúil, agus bhfuilm Jim Mhuíochas a Lacalatsa, Sochtan Curridum Tachtan seo, go Ulskal na Gaillimhe, agus go bhfuil tú chuna díospóireachtaí seo a churamh an seachtain seo. Sílim gúil sé Harbheith Ireland go mit an seo I gcathair na Gaillimhe. The 2016 programmes here at NUI Galway, as well as in Galway City and County, were exemplary. From the commemorations of Eamon Cant to the many rich and varied arts events throughout the year, Galway captured the true spirit of the centenary. And I know, Jim, that you don't mind if I also offer congratulations to GMIT Galway for their very valuable work during the year, both in regard to Cant and many other aspects of the centenary commemorations. I'm delighted to extend my personal welcome to Professor Roy Foster. Roy's contribution to the international understanding of Ireland, past and present, has been immense. I suspect that time will show us that one of Professor Foster's singular achievements has been his fusion of the historical and the cultural. He might say that there is no distinction between the two, that you cannot understand the events of the past without also understanding the cultural context. If he were to say that, I find that I agree with him. And as I look out on the vivid faces of his book, I'm reminded not just of his hugely enjoyable book of that name, but also of his monumental biography of Yeats, both of which have brought new dimensions to our understanding of that revolutionary generation and the cultural backdrop to 1916 and the early years of the state. It is fair to say that there wasn't a critical examination of history in the first 50 years after independence, consciously or unconsciously bending the past to construct a narrative for the new sovereign fledgling state. We certainly are not unique in that respect, and maybe it's only the passage of time that allows us to tell the history of traumatic events, both dispassionately and truthfully. Maybe now we can stop talking about revisionism and post-revisionism and focus instead on research and scholarship, both of which I'm happy to say have been greatly facilitated this year by massive amounts of digitization and wonderful projects like the military archives. Now, the idea for a major academic conference came from the Expert Advisory Group on Commemorations, which we set up upon entering government back in 2011, chaired by Dr. Maurice Manning. I'd also like to recognise Martin Mansur, whom I see here, a former minister and eminent historian who has added greatly to the authenticity of the group dealing with historic events. More than a year ago, Maurice Manning told me that this conference would be about the new scholarship of 2016, an exploration of what we know at the end of 2016 that we didn't know before. But you see, once a politician, always a politician. I should have known that he might change his mind, and I'm very glad that he did. And moving away from a conference that would only look back to one that also looks forward is in fact a true reflection of what happened this year, and a much more interesting and very useful exercise indeed. So let me thank you, Mirish, and acknowledge your personal contribution to the centenary. Your work and the work of your colleagues has been understated, has been judicious, and has been highly effective. You and all your colleagues on the advisory group have done the state truly a great service. So what did happen this year? It's very difficult to capture in a few sentences the full significance of 2016. There seemed to be an unexpected shift in the public mood, or maybe the centenary programme gave voice to something that was already changing in our national psyche. We are a long way from where we were 2 years ago, when there was an air of trepidation before we first announced the 2016 programme. I believe very much that the right balance was struck, and what began as reflections on patriotism became conversations about political values and about civic culture. A post-peace process reticence about the symbols of the state became a very proud celebration of our flag as a representation of shared traditions on this island, carried indeed physically into 3,200 primary schools by members of Óglaigh na hÉireann, our defence forces. A focus on national sovereignty became a whole series of discussions about equality and about freedom. It became clear that nationalism was just a part of Europeanism and internationalism, something that the poet Tom Kettle fully understood 100 years ago. The focus on our national culture became a debate about the place of culture in society. We looked at the proclamation as a historical document. We found instead a contemporary expression of the rights and the responsibilities of citizenship. We thought we were looking into the past, but it turned out that we are actually more interested in looking into the future, but a future based on the finest values of the past. We worried that the centenary year might be solemn, formulaic, and barely relevant to a new generation of young Irish people. It turned out to be creative, joyful, imaginative, inclusive of young and old, new Irish and old Irish, those of us living here and our friends and our families overseas, of an expanding Irish diaspora. In the end, 2016 was about three things: identity, citizenship, and culture, which you could also describe as the intersections of history, of politics, and of culture. The open and the generous public response to the centenary programme tells us that people are striving to find ways to be citizens rather than to be just consumers, to combine compassion with ambition, to make Ireland, this country, our home, in which everyone is equally cherished, and not just our workplace, and to participate creatively and imaginatively in shaping our future, locally and nationally. The county libraries, the county arts and heritage offices, the Royal Irish Academy, all of the national cultural institutions, the Arts Council, as well as theatres, county and city halls, arts festivals, the public airwaves, concert and music venues, the streets of our cities and towns, and indeed the landscape itself, all became a central focus of the centenary. In my lifetime, I've never seen all of the institutions and all of the agencies of state working together so successfully in a shared endeavour. And thank you, Minister Humphreys, for your leadership in that regard. RTE's contribution to the year showed a public broadcaster at its very best. I often give out about them. In this case, they were at their public best as a creator of cultural content and as a platform for the creative endeavours of everyone around the country and in our diaspora. So we need to build on all of this, and this is where the legacy of 2016 needs to come from. We will return to this theme in the coming weeks with details of a plan for the legacy of this year as an authentic expression of what actually happened, as well as beginning our work for the rest of the decade and centenaries. For now, let me just say a word or two about what I mean by legacy. A legacy is something that we create for future generations. Every generation has a responsibility to leave a legacy of value for the next. The centenary year actually gives us the opportunity and creates the obligation to articulate and to define what this generation must do to create a legacy worthy of the legacy bequeathed to us. As I say, as Gaeilge nua, there is a word, legáid, for legacy, but I prefer the old Irish word, aireacht. As many of you will understand, aireacht is the word for heritage. It's another example, if you like, of the wisdom found in the old language that is our Teangadúchais, that survived through an oral tradition. Heritage and legacy are the beginning and the end of the same thing. the connection between the generations that establishes who we are. So Oireachd as heritage is the only thing we all have a right to at birth. Oireachd as legacy is what we create for future generations. That is what I mean by legacy. It doesn't answer the question of what that legacy can be or how we should go about shaping it. One thing I am interested in is that, having learned the lessons of this year and the centenary commemorative events, we need to plan now as a mature people for the more sensitive issues that lie up ahead in that same decade. 1918, 21, 22, Civil War, the treaty negotiations, and so on. And having learned that our people, North and South, were able to come together in a sensitive, comprehensive, commemorative series of events for this year, we should plan now for years that have greater sensitivity and maybe more raw memory, and be able to plan for hands across those years and hands across that divide as a foundation of a legacy that we leave for the future, for those who come behind us. And secondly, the point raised with me in Belfast again the other day, given the circumstances we now find ourselves in with the outcome of the vote in the UK, that in the Brexit negotiations, from a European perspective, and that Ireland will continue to be a member of the European Union, we do need to be able to plan for some time in the future, 50 years or whenever. That when the question was asked that if Scotland became an independent country, it would have to reapply for admission to the European Union. Just like happened in Germany, we want to put into those negotiations an understanding that if arising from the Good Friday Agreement, at some time in the future, and I say at some time in the future, and there is no indication that that is now, or that that is in any way imminent, we should put in there that that transfer and that opportunity for people North and South, in compliance with that international agreement, should be facilitated by ease of transmission by the European Union. That's an issue that I think, as a foundation legacy, is something that we look to for some point in the future. And again, I stress that that's not in any way imminent now. In trying to answer the question also, I want to briefly return to an observation that I made earlier here about the intersections of politics, of history, and of culture, which is really what the days here in Galway are about. If you belong to the tradition of liberal democracy, you would have to be concerned at the trends that we now see around the world. We are witnessing large numbers of citizens becoming increasingly distrustful of reason and of truth, becoming oblivious to their history, and making profoundly important decisions on the basis of raw emotion. We do need to prove that the politics of the centre can deliver for all our people, and that the world is not a zero-sum game. But there is something else that we need to be aware of. Good citizenship is dependent upon a shared sense of both values and identity. A growing economy will not on its own support a strong and cohesive society. In a world of blinding change, we risk losing those connections with ourselves, within our communities, with our history and our heritage. Connections that can only be made and maintained and sustained by a rich and varied cultural life. So through art and culture and history, we do come to understand our common humanity. We learn to empathize, we learn to listen to each other, and we learn about the importance of human solidarity. Through art and culture, we join together instead of falling apart. So the state has a major role to play in sustaining the cultural life of the nation. We know this, but if 2016 has shown us anything, it is that we can do a lot more for our society, for our people, by supporting and by encouraging the widest possible active participation in the arts and culture activity generally, including history and heritage. The enriching of the spirit was, of course, a core value of the revolutionary generation. The poets and the playwrights, the revivalists and the writers had a vision that was as much about cultural freedom as political independence. 2 weeks ago, in Carrow, launched in the presence of Minister Kine, the first state strategy and policy to deal with education in schools in the Gaeltacht areas because of the decline of numbers. These speak a reality of an Ireland that's changing. For the first time, we recognise the state should try to assist in this measure to protect that richness and that value. And today in Rosmuch, less than 200 metres from Chachan Firsig, we opened formally the Interpretive Centre, which is called after Patrick Fierce and opened officially on his birthday today, in recognition of his work as a scholar, as an educator, as somebody who had made a real difference in terms of strengthening the language with particular emphasis on bilingualism. So I believe that when we take time to reflect on 2016, we will detect a cultural revival in our country, a revival that puts arts and culture at the very centre of public policy. And specifically in there should be our Janga Dúchais, because it's been there for it all: subjugation, plantation, rebellion, famine, eviction, emigration, revolution, execution. But it has endured. It contains that particular magic that Seamus Heaney would describe as being a cure or a charm for us all. So when we look at a legacy informed by those three themes of 2016, identity, citizenship, and culture, it becomes clear where the legacy must come from and where it must take us to. It is essentially about the creativity of our own people that is sustained and nourished by cultural engagement on a scale that we have witnessed this year. A creative oidhreacht that builds out from our cultural heritage to enable a cultural legacy. This is the greatest gift that we can make to our children and to our grandchildren. That's the legacy that we intend to build. So I wish you all a productive and interesting 3 days here in Galway. You will not come to this city of the tribes without having an interesting time. And what you're doing here is really important for all of us. Go raibh maith agaibh agus go maith raibh.